On this episode, we visit the Embarcadero in San Francisco. Then we learn about the danger of freeway ramps. Sacramento Regional Transit celebrates an anniversary. Finally, we drop by the California Council of the Blind. Stay tuned. We're in San Francisco talking with John Holtzclaw, who's chair of the Transportation Subcommittee of the Livable Communities Committee of the Sierra Club. What does that committee do?
That committee makes Sierra Club policy and involves activists all around the country on transportation issues, especially trying to cut the number of highways, reduce the amount of driving, improve pedestrian and bicycle facilities, improve public transit, getting people out of their cars.
Now, we're along the Embarcadero here.
The Embarcadero here. Before the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco, there was a double-decker freeway here that occupied the whole center part of this roadway. At places, the roadways had to wend their way through the columns of the freeway. You get soot, noise. You think there's noise here now on the roadway. It was worse when the freeway was here. There were two levels of it above you. So the earthquake damaged it, and we had it torn down as soon as it was damaged. I have a little piece of the concrete from the freeway. It was a big celebration when the first jackhammers went after it and we started to tear it down. And now we have a beautiful roadway. We had almost no one in these spaces before the quake. Now it's completely filled. The whole roadway's been rebuilt. The ferry building in the background there has been rebuilt, and it's just a wonderful place to be.
What happens when you have an elevated freeway along a waterfront? A lot of cities have done this. What's the impact on a city?
Well, the impact is it cuts the waterfront off. The waterfront is one of your major assets of a city like this. People want to go there. They want to see the waterfront. They want to see people getting into ferries and taking off. They want to see the activity, the water activity. And it's just so oppressive to have a double-decker freeway with all of that traffic. And initially, when it was first built, it was going to go all the way around to the Golden Gate Bridge on the north side of San Francisco. But when the people of San Francisco saw this big barrier to the waterfront, they rebelled against it, and we say the freeway revolt started here. Bostonians say they started it, but we think we started it, but about the same time. And so it wasn't built any further, but at the same time, until it was broken, we couldn't tear it down. We couldn't get the people and the Board of Supervisors to support tearing it down.
So you had a little help from an earthquake there.
Yeah, well, we say that, we're being the Sierra Club. We go to Mother Nature, and Mother Nature helps at times.
Now, when this whole space was rebuilt, what was the key to rebuilding it so it would be part of a livable community rather than just another mistake?
Obviously, the main key was getting the freeway down. We did put a light rail, and you've seen the classic light rails running down the center here by us. We widened the sidewalks. We narrowed the number of traffic lanes for cars, and we put in stoplights, made sure that they had to stop frequently. So it encourages people to walk or take transit rather than driving.
What sort of economic development has taken place along this new space?
Well, these piers, before the earthquake, these piers were all deteriorating. There wasn't much going on there. They've been rebuilt since then. Offices going in there, restaurants going in there. The ferry building was completely rebuilt. It has a farmer's market that operates on Saturday and Sunday. Everything along here is being rebuilt and refurbished and upgraded. There's a parking lot here that hopefully will have about 5 stories of beautiful housing built on it shortly. And the whole area has just come up. It's economically so much better off than it was before.
Now there's a city somewhere that has elevated freeway along their riverfront or their lakefront or oceanfront.
Tear it down. Yeah. Portland did the same thing along its riverfront, tore down a freeway. I don't think it was even damaged, and it's all walkway now. So yes, tear them down. Rebuild the city. Move your commerce and your population to places where they can really enjoy it, rather than it just being a place to drive through quickly. Make a destination rather than just something to traverse.
We're in San Francisco, talking with Fran Taylor with Walk San Francisco. What is Walk San Francisco?
Well, Walk San Francisco, as its name implies, is an organization to promote walking in San Francisco. And it involves safety measures as well as just encouraging people to get out. San Francisco is touted as a walkable city. That's one of the reasons tourists come here. But it has a lot of problems. And the sort of cliche about San Francisco being a walkable city hides some of those issues, and Walk San Francisco is trying to deal with those issues, trying to publicize injuries and deaths, but not just make it sound like it's a dangerous proposition to get out there and walk. We want it to be pleasant to walk. We want to encourage people to walk. There's safety in numbers. There's a lot of social issues that could be helped by more people just being out on the streets at night on foot and this sort of thing. So we want it to be build the city from the feet up, basically.
And we're maybe 100 yards from a freeway over here. What's the freeway we're next to?
Well, this freeway goes to the Bay Bridge, which goes to the East Bay for all you people. If you picture San Francisco, Oakland Bridge between them, a lot of water. And it's a major commute artery. San Francisco is a peninsula, and it can be reachable by land from the south, but then you have the Golden Gate Bridge on the north and this Bay Bridge to the east, where it goes to Oakland, Berkeley, and Nevada, points east. And this is a Sunday afternoon, so it's very quiet. And on a Friday afternoon, it's a little busier. During the morning rush hour, it's actually very busy here. And this freeway cuts through an area called south of Market. Market Street's the main drag, and it's a few blocks that way. And one of the things that this freeway does is it has a lot of ramps. And every time there's a ramp, either on or off, it creates one of these pedestrian hell situations where you either have to cross three ways to get just from here to there, or you have to run across a ramp, or you have to look over your shoulder for the turning cars. And it's a problem throughout this area, because if you try to walk from point A to B, sometimes you're going to have to zigzag and cross the same street several times, just because on this side the ramp's on over here, and then you get a few blocks up the ramp's over there, and so you wind up doubling your steps. That is not a way to encourage people to walk, and it's giving priority to cars.
So getting the cars up on the freeway hasn't solved the pedestrian vehicle conflict.
Oh, not at all. Well, they don't stay up there. In the press lately, there's been a sort of conventional wisdom expressed in letters to the editor and commentaries and so on that, well, it would be much safer for pedestrians if we had more freeways. And I don't quite get the notion that encouraging this kind of an intersection is making it safer for pedestrians. It's actually encouraging people who come off the freeway. They're still mentally at a freeway speed, especially if the light's green. When they exit the ramp, they just keep sailing along at 50 miles an hour. And here we have, the turning traffic having priority. So across the street here, sort of kitty corner from us, is a bus stop. Now here's the bus here. It's going to turn over there. If I wanted to catch that bus, the light's green for this traffic. I could go with that, except that there's a sign there that says no pedestrian crossing. So I have to wait now for this light, that light, and a third light. Meanwhile, the bus is gone, and I have to wait another 20 minutes. So this doesn't make the city walkable. This is sort of a blemish on that reputation that San Francisco has as a walkable city. And I just want to point out that the areas where most tourists go, where they say, oh, it's so walkable, it's so nice, don't have any freeways. Up at Fisherman's Wharf, there's no freeway. You go to Coit Tower, you go to the sites around that part of the city, North Beach, all the cafes, the sidewalk cafes and so on. There are no freeways there. and it is very walkable. But you get down here where the people work and where the people live, and you have to do this little dance of crossing 3 times.
We're talking with Mike Wiley, who's Deputy General Manager of Sacramento Regional Transit. What is Regional Transit?
Well, Regional Transit's a public agency that was created by state legislation in 1973 to basically build, maintain, operate, plan, fund all of the public transit service in Sacramento County.
And you're having a little party this Friday. What's going on?
This Friday, we're celebrating 20 years of light rail service. 20 years ago, in 1987, we started the inaugural service, we called it the starter line, of light rail in Sacramento that ran from Watt I-80 to downtown Sacramento. That started in March of '87, and then in September of that year, we started the second phase that completed the starter line from downtown Sacramento along the Highway 50 corridor out as far as the Butterfield station.
How much light rail do you have operating today?
Well, initially we had about 18.7 miles in the starter line back in '87. Today we have about 37 miles of rail in service. We started at about 6,000 riders a day initially during that first year, and today we carry over 50,000 riders a day on rail.
What are your plans for the future? What's your master transit plan look like?
Well, next up on the most immediate horizon is a further extension of light rail to the south area. We expect to be in final design on that project by this coming February, in just a few short months. We'll complete the final design and start into construction about a year after that and begin service about 3 to 4 years after that. And it'll extend light rail from the current terminus at Meadowview Station south to Casitas River College, adding 4 new stations. Following that, our next up in terms of phasing is some service on what we call the DNA, the Downtown Natomas Airport line, looking ultimately at a light rail line from downtown across Richards Boulevard, across the American River, north all the way through south and north of Natomas to the airport. Beyond that, we will be updating our master plan. We initiated a process to develop what we call our Transit Master Plan, or TMP for short. That process is currently underway. We expect to complete that process in about 18 months. And that process will result in the update of a master plan that is now 14 to 15 years old. A lot has happened since 1993 that we need to consider, that looks at where we go, how we do it, what level of service we're going to operate, what mode of service we're going to operate, whether it be more light rail service, more bus rapid transit, streetcar services, or neighborhood shuttle type services, and how much it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it.
And transit does not operate in a vacuum. You have land use issues, where your customers are coming from and going to. Who's involved in putting together the plan so that the transit goes where it's needed?
Well, it's critical that the update to this master plan be what we've called the People's Plan, because at the end of the day, we envision a significantly expanded transit service to really meet the needs of the changing land use vision, the blueprint land use vision for Sacramento County. The development patterns that are emerging now are going to become more and more dependent on a very effective transit system. And in order for us to achieve that, it's going to require a significant level of resources, a lot more money in order to build this. Well, in order to achieve that, we believe that the voters are going to have to approve increased funding for transit. So if we don't have a plan that really reflects the views of the public, the views of the voters, it'll just be a document that collects dust on a shelf somewhere, and that's not our goal. We want to put together a plan that is a mandate of the people, that basically the voters will get behind and approve the level of funding that's needed to meet these new growth principles.
Population of California is projected to grow very substantially over the next few decades. Sacramento is going to get its share of that growth, if not more. How does that fit into your planning process?
Well, it actually fits in very well, because some of the land use visions that we have now and all of the local general plans are being updated to reflect a different land use development pattern. And a lot of that will focus around rail stations. what we call transit-oriented development, where we're looking at mixed uses, somewhat higher densities around the rail stations, so we make better use of that land, more walkable, more bikeable, better interfaces between transit and those other modes of walk and bike, so that we can encourage people to get out of their cars. Stop, and the whole concept is to stop using farmland and using this growth area that goes beyond the current areas that development has occurred in. Refocus internally, look at internal growth, look at reusing what we have. All of that is part of the vision, and the transit system plays a key role in moving people. If we don't greatly expand the transit system and we build this different land use vision 30, 40 years from now, the whole greater Sacramento community would become one giant parking lot. In order to make it work, we have to significantly expand transit service.
We're in Sacramento, California, talking with Gene Lozano with the California Council of the Blind. What's your position with the council?
I'm the second vice president of the statewide organization.
And what sort of issues do you deal with?
I deal with the architectural barrier and transportation issues on behalf of the organization.
And dealing with transportation issues, you're dealing a lot with pedestrian issues. What sort of issues do you have in common with some of the other pedestrian advocacy groups out there?
Many of them. The removal of barriers at intersections and along sidewalks. We're in common agreement with the disability leaders to have curb ramps, 2 curb ramps per corner. It provides greater safety for persons with mobility devices, so that the curb ramps are within the crosswalks, so they don't have to enter the street at the apex of a corner and make a turn to get into the crosswalk, so it's safer for them. For us, it provides an orientation cue so that the curb ramps are oriented in the direction of the opposite corner, so that helps us in making street crossings. The removal of overhangs, like signs or branches that overhang the public right-of-way, so that's something we have in common with the interests of different disability groups. Removal of guide wires, the path of travel being free of obstacles. So that is, in those areas we have a lot of commonalities, and maybe for different reasons, but the ultimate, it's free access.
And there are some areas where your concerns might not be identical. For example, roundabouts. What's your stand on roundabouts?
Well, roundabouts, the organization, but also as users who are blind or visually impaired, we are not in support of the roundabout concept. Roundabouts, the idea is to have automobile traffic moving continuously and without having the need for light signals. Well, audible sounds from automobiles is an orientation cue for us, and we use that cue listening to parallel and perpendicular moving traffic. So when we have traffic that's continuously moving from all different directions, we are uncertain as to when we can cross. And since there's no street lights, traffic lights rather, we don't have that information to know when to cross. So it's a really safety issue for us, life and safety really. Sometimes our peers in the pedestrian advocacy movement say that, just make the eye contact with the motorists and they'll yield the right of way. But we have the problem of not knowing which automobile to look in the direction of, and hope if we do identify a moving car, that we're making that eye contact. If you're totally blind, of course, you can't see the motorist. So that's a big problem there. Sometimes we've had some differences over the placement of detectable warnings. And we've, over in the few years, since the Barden case, have been able to come up with a design that is more friendlier to user for all parties. The detectable warnings are very critical to alerting us when we're leaving the sidewalk and entering the street. We know that there are some people in the physically disability community who really like corners that are flush with the street because there's no abrupt changes in the transition from street to sidewalk. But for us, there's no cue to indicate when you're leaving one and entering the other, so the detectable warnings are needed there also. So that is something, sometimes there's a difference there.
And you talked about having a clear path of travel on the sidewalk. But sometimes to liven up an urban area, you have things such as sidewalk cafes and so
Yes.
on. What problems does that present, and how can it be done so that they don't present a problem?
Well, the outdoor cafes are a real asset for neighborhoods. It has brings more life to the neighborhood, and it provides safety and so forth, the presence there. But for us who can't see, the placement of tables and chairs that encroach into the public right-of-way can become an obstacle and a barrier. And so sometimes we can walk into them, we can get disoriented, as well as sometimes we can hurt ourselves or somebody else. The solution would be to encircle these cafes with a decorative barrier, like a fence, a wrought iron fence, or something that would delineate where the areas for the cafe users and the customers there, and then a public right-of-way that's clear for us and other pedestrians to walk along the sidewalk without encroaching into that area that is reserved for eating. Other problems we have sometimes is sidewalks or trails or places where there's a mixed use, where you have competing modes of transportation, and that can be the bicyclists and pedestrians, or now the newer concept of shared streets where there is no curbs, there's nothing to distinguish the pedestrian area from the vehicular way, and that again relies on a person making eye contact with another person, and if you can't see, you don't have that visual cue, and you don't know where to avoid or where to go to get out of the way of another moving person or vehicle. So that's something. Large open spaces like large malls. Again, you don't have reference points to know where you are in relationship to where you might be wanting to go, to a building or a pathway. And then on top of that, you can have where these malls, there's artwork or fountains put in the way, so that those three-dimensional artwork pieces are sometimes right there in the pathway, and you can run into them, even though you're using a cane. If you have a guide dog, they may be able to take you around them to avoid an accident, but you're not aware of their presence. The fountains can mask the water fountains can mask the sound of other auditory cues that we need, and then we run into issues of street furniture, where it's not just the cafes, but sometimes you put out in these malls benches and tables that we really think are really asset for pedestrians who really, sometimes want to take a break or sit down and communicate with one another, but it's their placement. And that is planning. It's like if the designers would sit down with persons with the disabilities, people who have some functional limitations that might limit them in getting through an area like that, sitting down and working out solutions. So not eliminating things like fountains, but finding ways of how to place them in a way that they're obvious to a person with a visual impairment. And so it's working together as a collaborative team.
Is that the key, just having the people that are planning and designing these things have a more complete team that brings in all the different perspectives?
Absolutely. Sitting down and everyone being open to hear one another's opinion. And sometimes I think it even helps where you have somebody who maybe an engineer that maybe blindfold themselves and try to figure out and try and go out there. It's not the same thing as being totally blind, because you have training and how to get around, but just have that little experience, just not having the vision, just closing your eyes too and just looking around and saying, how would I get through this thing? You know, what are some of the cues? And I have found that's worked, where sometimes I've actually taken groups of engineers. A few years ago at one of the America Walks meetings in Oakland, California, took a group of Caltrans engineers out to show why it was important to have accessible pedestrian signals. And we had one intersection that had no signals operational at the time, and so they listened to the traffic and tried to figure out when they would be able to make a crossing. Then the signals were activated with the audible sound that announced the walk phase, and that made a world of difference. And from that, we have found that sometimes those engineers have been more open to considering putting accessible pedestrian signals in. And there were local traffic engineers involved at that time, too. So again, it's working together.
Have intersections changed over the years that made things easier or more difficult for the blind pedestrian?
The environment, the built environment's become more challenging and very much more complex. Probably 20, 30 years ago, you found typically intersections designed a plus intersection, two streets crossing one another at a right angle. Now, because of the need for right turn lanes, large right turn lanes for larger vehicles to go around the corners, they're offset, they're at angles, so and there are multiple streets intersecting. So it becomes more difficult to make those crossings, because you don't know which direction it's okay for you to cross at the time. And that's really necessitated the issue of having more accessible pedestrian signals that give you that audible announcement when to make the crossing.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.